Hey guys, tonight we slip into brocade shoes, powdered wigs, and candlelit halls as we enter the flirtatious world of the 18th century. Specifically, the mysterious language of fan flirting. You're about to attend a ball, but not just any ball. This one is thick with perfume, gossip, and coded gestures where one wrong fan movement could mean, "I desire you," and another might say, "Kindly leave me alone forever." And the worst part? You probably won't survive this. Not because of the politics, but because someone might mistake your attempt at goodbye for "meet me behind the hedge." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our sleepy little global village grow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk into the ballroom like you've just been summoned to the court of Marie Antoinette herself. The air is a mixture of wax smoke, rosewater, and secrets. Somewhere near the back, a quartet is playing a minuet that no one actually knows the steps to, and all around you, fans. Fluttering, clicking, whispering things only the trained eye could read. You're not just observing this, you're expected to participate. But don't worry, you have time. The ball has only just begun. The host, a minor duchess with a terrifying wig that appears to house at least one bird, greets you briefly before being swept away in her own tornado of taffeta. The folding fan, your new accessory/lifeline, isn't merely for keeping cool. Tonight, it is a sword, a shield, a subtle semaphore tower perched delicately in your gloved hand. While its history goes back centuries, tonight's variation has its roots in the East, likely China, possibly Japan. Traders brought them over in the late Renaissance, and Europe did what Europe does. Added lace, gold leaf, and just enough symbolism to ruin several courtships per night. You sidle past a group of powdered nobles murmuring about opera, fencing, and someone named Charlotte, who scandalously wore blue last week. That's when you see her. Across the room, fan aloft like a monarch's scepter, a lady makes eye contact. Not at you, of course. She's not a monster, but she's definitely seen you. Her fan flicks once, casually. Or was it deliberate? She lifts it to her left cheek. You scramble to recall your crash course in fan flirtation. Left cheek means, "I'm interested," right? Or was it "beware, my father owns pistols"? Historians still argue whether the language of the fan was ever codified or if it was just a bit of charming nonsense added after the fact by etiquette book publishers desperate to sell copies. But in this ballroom, every flutter feels meaningful. You move closer. Let's talk about your outfit. You're wearing at least 3 layers, including a waistcoat that might be lined with lead, a cravat tied in a manner so complicated that it's been known to trap birds, and shoes that require more balance than your modern gym class ever prepared you for. But no matter, because the fan is doing all the heavy lifting. You pass a mirror. Yes, you look ridiculous, but so does everyone else. As the evening unfolds, you start noticing things. That lady over there? She's tapping her fan against her chin, rumored to mean, "I like you." Or maybe she's just bored of the gossip. And that gentleman? He's just stabbed himself slightly with the bone ribbing of his fan while trying to look suave. No one helps. This is the 18th century. We do not show weakness. The fan is everywhere. In portraits, ladies hold them delicately while staring off into existential dread. In plays, characters whip them open with dramatic flair to indicate a plot twist is coming. And in this ballroom, it's your only lifeline. It's your social armor, your mute tongue, your ultimate party trick. Quaint as it may seem, these fans were expensive. Some were made with ivory, mother of pearl, or even chicken skin stretched so thin it made lace look like burlap. Painted with tiny pastoral scenes or biblical warnings, depending on how your family felt about premarital eye contact. They were works of art in miniature. At this point, you've accidentally waved your fan in what might be the 18th century equivalent of "call me maybe." A footman raises an eyebrow. You lower the fan quickly. Across the floor, the woman from earlier is now laughing into her fan, which either means, "I'm engaged," "I'm amused," or "I just remembered a goat fell into a fountain this morning." You're not sure. But one thing is clear, this ballroom, this society, this whole world, is one where silence often speaks louder than words, where fans whisper what mouths dare not say. And you're slowly learning to listen. The music shifts. The minuets are growing faster. Someone just attempted a dance turn and nearly knocked over a punch bowl. You drift toward the terrace, needing air, and what do you see? Another couple, backlit by the moon, their fans barely moving, just resting against their shoulders. No need for codes anymore. The message has been delivered. The answer understood. And now, silence. You lean against the balustrade of the terrace, the air crisp and carrying hints of lavender and roasting chestnuts from a distant kitchen window. Behind you, the ballroom swells with candlelight and chatter. Ahead of you, a still garden where secrets are easier to keep. You lift your fan, not to flirt, but because you're trying to remember whether holding it open in the left hand means, I want to dance, or, I saw you spill that soup earlier. The history of fan flirting, like much of 18th century etiquette, is a glorious mess of half-truths, pamphlet folklore, and regional improvisation. The fan language most often quoted today, the one where dropping your fan means I belong to you, didn't actually appear until long after the century in question. It was likely popularized by Victorian authors nostalgic for a past that never quite existed. But in salons and soirees across Europe, especially in Spain and France, women and men certainly used the fan as a prop of theater. And where there's theater, there's improvisation. You make it up as you go, and hope your audience claps instead of duels you. A sudden burst of laughter from the ballroom reminds you. In here, miscommunication can be dangerous. Lady Cressida apparently waved her fan over her left shoulder, which everyone knows means follow me. But unfortunately, she did so in front of her fiancé and her fiancé's very married fencing instructor. Drama is now unfolding at the pace of a string quartet falling down the stairs. You step back inside, feeling wiser. Every movement is a choice. The fan, when wielded correctly, is less like a tool and more like an extension of the body. It's not unlike texting with your eyebrows. A raised brow here, a flick of lace there. Every gesture is curated, and every response scrutinized under 20 layers of social expectation. The fans themselves reflect class distinctions as clearly as your cravat reflects candlelight. A noblewoman's fan might be a gift from Versailles, with painted scenes of shepherds who look suspiciously well-fed. A merchant's daughter might carry a more modest version, perhaps paper with printed woodcut images, often worn soft by use but no less effective in conveying, please leave me alone forever. One popular feature, secret compartments. Yes, some fans had hidden pouches, just large enough to slip a note or perhaps a tiny lock of hair. You're reminded of one such fan in a museum, said to belong to a marquise who carried love letters folded so thin, they left ink stains on her palms. Romantic? Certainly. Practical? Not even slightly. Historians still argue whether there was an actual standardized language, or just a convenient excuse to explain away awkward gestures. Oh no, I wasn't dismissing you. I meant, I'm anxious. Is a lot easier than admitting your hand cramped mid-wave. It's possible that entire relationships were built or destroyed on fan misfires. Imagine basing your romantic fate on an object so flimsy it could snap mid-sentence. And yet, the beauty of it all was that everyone played along. A gentleman would pretend not to notice the deliberate glance followed by the slow fan draw across the face, even as he rehearsed his best bow in response. A lady would feign surprise at receiving a dance invitation, even though she had spent the last half hour wafting her fan under her chin, which clearly meant, I would be delighted. Outside the ballroom, fan flirting wasn't confined to courtship. It seeped into theater and literature. Actresses on the stage used fans to punctuate monologues, fluttering them like exclamation points. Playwrights leaned into the drama, scripting fan movements into scenes with as much precision as swordplay. And speaking of swordplay, some fans were designed with concealed blades. Yes, you heard that correctly. In certain parts of Italy and Spain, where passions often led to daggers, fans doubled as weapons. A flick of the wrist might go from, I adore you to en garde in a single motion. Of course, yours doesn't come with a blade. At least, we hope not. Back inside, the dancing has slowed. You watch as two ladies walk side by side, their fans open in front of their faces. Not to flirt, but to gossip, shielded from view. The fan as a privacy tool, a makeshift veil, a whispering tent. The concept of fans as masks is something philosophers might love. What better way to say I'm seen and don't look at me at the same time? You sit now on an embroidered bench, fan resting gently on your lap. The night is wearing on, and though your shoes feel like miniature prisons, your posture has grown confident. You can now spot a yes from a no, a follow me, from a never speak to me again. You even begin to wonder if you could start inventing fan signals of your own. What might "I'm sleepy" look like? Or "please send cake immediately"? And then there's the artistry, the tiny painted scenes, each more whimsical than the last. Shepherds frolic. Nymphs lounge. Birds carry scrolls for reasons no one remembers. These fans were not just social tools but also status symbols and miniature galleries. Entire workshops were devoted to the craft, employing painters, paper makers, lace weavers, and even perfumers to scent the folds. There's a story of a Spanish duchess who commissioned a fan depicting her entire estate, including the stables, the chapel, and her favorite peacock, Octavius. The fan was so large it became unusable for flirtation, but as a dinner table conversation starter, it was unmatched. By now, you've seen enough to understand. The fan is more than an accessory. It is the 18th century's answer to social media, part style, part signal, part curated identity. With one sweep, you announce your mood. With a flick, you shut the world out. It's elegant. It's absurd. It's human. The clock is chiming midnight. You lift your fan, not as a message, not as a weapon, but simply because it feels right. The night's dance is almost done. The candles are burning lower now, and you can feel the waxy warmth in the air, mingling with perfume, powder, and the unmistakable tang of late-night sweat masked by lavender water. You sit quietly along the edge of the room, observing the unspoken theater continuing to unfold. Every swirl of lace, every snap of a fan, every barely suppressed yawn disguised as modesty. Tonight's performance isn't confined to fans alone. There's a whole cast of supporting props in this 18th century ballet. Gloves, handkerchiefs, shawls, but none as expressive, as unrelentingly flirty, as the folding fan. And as you observe from your cushioned corner, you begin to wonder, who taught people how to use these things? The answer, predictably, involves an entire subculture of etiquette guides, conduct books, and, perhaps most charmingly, salon games. You see, some noble women weren't just using fans. They were studying them. In the 1700s, particularly in France and Italy, young ladies often learned the art of the fan, the way you might take piano or needlepoint, part performance, part strategy, all reputation. One popular pastime in upper-class salons was the fan game. You and a group of companions would sit in a circle, each person given a different gesture to decode. One person would send a message using only their fan. Another would have to translate it. If you got it right, applause and a bonbon. If not, well, you might owe the group a recitation or, worse, a forfeit like declaring your latest crush aloud. Tragic. Of course, the rules changed with geography. In Madrid, where fans were practically glued to women's hands, the gestures were bolder, more theatrical, think flamenco, not ballet. A Spanish lady might snap her fan shut with a flourish sharp enough to silence an entire courtyard. In Paris, it was subtler. Flicks, glances, a dainty hiding of the smile behind painted silk. Historians still argue whether these games were truly widespread or romanticized later by memoirists with foggy recollections and better PR. But it's clear that fans weren't just for cooling or courtship. They were tools for coded communication, a private language in public spaces. And like all languages, they needed practice. You remember now that in some finishing schools, girls were actually taught to flirt properly. A phrase that sounds absolutely preposterous until you realize what was at stake. Marrying well meant financial security, social elevation, or at the very least, not being stuck in a damp country estate with your aunt's 16 cats. Your fan wasn't just lace and ribbon. It was a lifeline. There's a legend, probably embroidered beyond recognition, of a noblewoman who managed to conduct an entire secret affair in the presence of her husband using only fan signals and the help of a very bored footman. 1 flick meant he's coming. 2 flicks meant leave immediately. A closed fan over her heart? It was worth it. The affair, predictably, ended in a disastrous misunderstanding involving a misplaced sneeze and an unfortunate fig tart. And yes, fan misfires were real. Imagine you're at a formal dinner. You drop your fan. He picks it up. You smile and gently fan your left cheek. He blushes. But wait, you meant to fan your right cheek, which signals disinterest. Now you're committed to a conversation about beet exports from Belgium, and the only polite escape involves either swooning or starting a small fire. But let's not forget the fan wasn't just for women. Men, too, had their moments, particularly in hotter climates or in theatrical circles, where flamboyance was practically a currency. In fact, several portraits survive of 18th-century noblemen holding fans, though their versions were often less delicate, more angular, folding bamboo or even ivory, used not for messages but as signals of status, luxury, or perhaps just, I'm hot and I don't care who knows it. There's also the curious case of the war fans from Asia, especially Japan, where the gunsen and tessen were iron-ribbed fans used by samurai. They served dual purposes: commanding troops on the battlefield and whacking overzealous courtiers at court. You can't help but wish those had made it into European fashion. Imagine the Duchess of Devonshire subtly bonking someone over the head during a dull speech. Iconic. Back in your ballroom, the rhythm has slowed. A sleepy harpsichord piece drifts from the corner, played by a musician who looks like he's considering a career change. Across the room, a couple engages in a slow, spiraling waltz. The woman's fan rests closed against her chest, neutral territory. She's not refusing him, but she's not encouraging either. It's the fan equivalent of, I'm listening, but this better be good. You wonder how many misunderstandings were quietly resolved or catastrophically escalated because of fan signals. Historians suggest entire letters were once written in fan code, though it's unclear how many of these letters were serious and how many were playful hoaxes. One surviving example from a Florentine collection simply reads, if she waves 3 times, meet me at the fountain. If not, pretend this letter never existed. There's something endearingly inefficient about it all. In a world before texting or emojis, before even reliable mail, you relied on shared context and a whole lot of improvisation. And yet, somehow, it worked. Or at least, it made things more interesting. You sigh and adjust your posture. Your own fan is resting lightly against your fingers. You try a few gestures of your own, purely for fun. Flick once, rest it on your left hand, slowly trace the edge. You're inventing a message. You're saying, I'm sleepy but curious. Or maybe, I see you, I don't know what you said, but it sounded important. There's a quiet delight in this secret choreography. The idea that you can say everything and nothing with a flick of your wrist. You don't need to speak. You only need to move. Slowly, deliberately, and hope someone, somewhere, understands you. The clock strikes something muffled and polite, probably 10:30 or thereabouts, though you can't be sure because time here seems to glide like perfume on brocade. You lean back slightly, just enough to stretch your ankles beneath your chair. Across the room, a lady in seafoam green rises from her conversation, glides toward the open terrace, and flicks her fan once. Slow, upward, final. The gesture is so subtle it could be nothing, or it could mean follow me. Now, you're starting to see the dance of deception that fan language invites. The whole game works precisely because of its ambiguity. If everyone knew what every gesture meant, it wouldn't be secret. And if no one knew, it wouldn't be fun. Somewhere between those two extremes, entire lives of courtship, rivalry, and whispered betrayal unfolded. Tonight, we're sinking deeper into the role fans played in that delicate arena of court politics and social manipulation. Because in the 18th century, especially at Versailles or Vienna or St. Petersburg, knowing how to use your fan wasn't just charming, it was survival. Imagine you're invited to court for the first time. You've got 3 things: your name, your dress, and your fan. Your goal? Avoid scandal, impress someone useful, and maybe, just maybe, get the queen to notice your new earrings. But one wrong gesture, one accidental signal, and you've just flirted with someone's husband or insulted a duchess who controls half of Burgundy. Whoops. Some noblewomen, cleverer than the rest, turned this risk into an advantage. They used the ambiguity of fans to cause mischief without consequence. If caught, they could always feign innocence. "Oh no, Your Grace. I wasn't waving an insult. I was merely fending off the heat," which, given the size of the wigs and the number of corsets in the room, was usually believable. Historians still argue whether specific fans were ever designed with code charts printed discreetly inside, sort of a cheat sheet for flirts. Some claim to have seen such fans in collections, though others argue these were later Victorian novelties, retrofitted to suit romantic nostalgia rather than actual 18th century use. Still, it's not entirely far-fetched. This was, after all, the age of cipher rings, secret drawers, and perfume that doubled as poison. You might be surprised to learn that at certain royal courts, fan gestures were even used to direct attention during diplomatic visits. A princess from the Habsburg line, reportedly fluent in 4 languages but tired of translating, developed her own set of signals to communicate with her ladies-in-waiting during tedious ambassadorial banquets. 1 flick meant, "He's boring." 2 flicks? "Bring me cake." Again, possibly apocryphal, but who are we to deny a bored princess her cake? The deeper truth is this. The fan thrived precisely because it was neither word nor silence. It lived in the in-between, and in a world bound by strict etiquette and social control, that was power. You can picture a group of ladies clustered near the edge of a marble gallery, pretending to discuss embroidery. Their fans flutter with idle grace. One tilts hers vertically, signaling disinterest in the gentleman approaching. Another taps hers against her lips, deep in pretend contemplation. A third simply lowers hers slowly and deliberately, like a curtain falling. That one clearly has made a decision. There's something theatrical about it all, and no wonder. The court was performance. Your rank might be inherited, but your influence, that had to be played. And the fan? It was both mask and spotlight. In some cases, fans were also weapons, figuratively but sometimes almost literally. A well-aimed snap of the fan could serve as a rebuke, a warning, even a declaration of social war. One duchess, described in a snarky letter from a rival, was said to swat away suitors as if they were flies, and her fan snapped with such vigor it startled the parrot. Of course, parrot trauma aside, fans were also used to fake apologies. A carefully staged fan drop could signal submission or regret, depending, of course, on whether the lady retrieved it herself or waited for someone to return it. The nuance here was maddening. One could spend weeks deciphering a single evening's gestures, only to realize none of them mattered, because the host's cousin had tripped into the soup tureen and become the sole topic of conversation for the next month. You begin to suspect that half of fan communication was less about what you meant and more about what they wanted to believe you meant. And really, isn't that true of most gossip? It's worth noting, too, that the construction of a fan could affect its use in these subtle performances. A stiffer fan allowed for sharper movements, perfect for dramatic flicks or sudden closures. A looser, silkier fan offered more fluid gestures, ideal for slow glides or pretend modesty. Some even had hidden bells or charms that tinkled faintly when moved a certain way. It wasn't just about the signal, it was about how much sound or movement you could get away with without breaching decorum. And there were always watchers. Chaperones, rivals, lurking poets hoping for inspiration. These people watched fans the way gamblers watch dice, with desperate focus, hoping to read their fate in the tilt of a wrist. Even in paintings from this period, you'll notice how often the fan is featured, not as an accessory, but as a gesture. A hand mid-flick, a fan raised coyly to cover a smile, a half-open fan resting like a sigh across a lap. Artists captured these moments for their ambiguity, because a fan never says just one thing. It says what you want it to and what you're afraid it might. Your eyes close momentarily as you imagine the rustle of skirts, the faint slap of silk fan against gloved palm, the heat of too many candles, the endless games within games. And then you see her, the lady in seafoam green. She's back from the terrace now, walking past you without a glance. Her fan is closed. Her cheeks are flushed. And if you'd blinked, you might have missed it. But there, at the very edge of her sleeve, a smile curling like a secret she'll never share. By now, you've probably noticed how much of this entire fan thing depends on the waiting. The in-between moments where silence, rather than noise, does the most work. It's a game of restraint, and the fan, with all its delicate flutterings, its snap and soft click, was built precisely for it. In a world where speech could betray you, a fan offered a very subtle form of rebellion. Let's pause for a moment. You've been sitting for a while now, perhaps beginning to feel the weight of the night pressing down. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Maybe, just maybe, there's a fan resting in your lap. It's still cool against your hand. But back to our courtly world. The use of fans wasn't reserved solely for the courts, of course. The upper classes in urban centers also enjoyed the fan's many charms, both practical and symbolic. As our story continues, we see this prop turn up in a variety of settings, not just at balls or royal chambers, but in quieter, more domestic spaces. So imagine you're sitting in a lovely salon in Paris in 1785, perhaps sipping tea, as a lady with impeccable posture slowly flicks open her fan. She does it with grace, but there's something about it that catches your attention. It's almost too deliberate, too slow, like she's performing for you. You shift in your seat and wonder, what is she signaling? The answer, of course, depends on who you are in this room. The fan wielder is probably an aristocrat, and you are most certainly not. You might be a merchant, perhaps even a wealthy one, but still, there's something about the gesture that makes your heart race. Is it a flirtation, or is she merely cooling herself in the heat of the room? And if it is a flirtation, well, what does it mean when the fan remains open for an extra moment, perhaps just a second longer than necessary? A tiny flick of her wrist gives you no chance to respond. It's too fast, too quick. She knows something you don't. And, just like that, you begin to feel the weight of performance again. This isn't just a woman with a fan in her hand. It's a woman performing a ritual, one that has been passed down for centuries, a code of silent gestures that only a select few can interpret. If you think about it, the fan was a small but dangerous weapon for social climbing, especially for women in the 18th century. The movements, the tilt of the head, the positioning of the fan itself, these were all coded signals that could make or break a reputation. So, in this little salon, while she seems so casual, there's a storm of implications in that open fan. Whether it's a subtle rejection or an invitation to an affair, there's enough power there to send ripples through her social network. But don't be fooled into thinking the fan was a tool for just the women of the court or society. Men, too, held the fan with just as much flair, though they preferred a simpler design, often only for the effect it had in a setting like this. One of the most famous and successful fan wielders of all time was none other than King Louis XVI of France, a man who was well known for his enthusiastic use of the fan. Legend tells of his brilliant maneuvering at court, when he used his fan not only as a fashion statement but also as a clever deflection during tense political moments. You can imagine him now, there he stands, ever regal, with a slight, self-assured flick of the wrist as he positions his fan at just the right angle, a gesture that can convey both modesty and immense authority at once. With his fan, he could pull off the perfect mix of charm and distance, disarming even the most powerful diplomats. Historians still argue whether his fans were a true reflection of his inner political strategies or whether they were mere accessories. Innocent props meant to keep his hands busy while his mind worked on much more important matters. Meanwhile, outside of France, the fan had its role in more colorful contexts. In Spain, the fan wasn't only a social cue, it became a fashion accessory of almost religious importance. In a country where personal appearance could make or break an individual's future, to master the art of the fan was to master the art of seduction, yes, but also of power. To wear a fan elegantly, to flick it precisely, to handle it as though it were an extension of your very soul, that was the true mark of a Spaniard who knew how to move through society's intricacies. But not every fan signal had such grand ambitions. Some gestures were far more personal. Consider the slightly trembling flick of the wrist, that tiny involuntary gesture, signaling that something more subtle, something far more intimate was happening. Could it be a gentle no, spoken without sound? Or was it a soft, lingering perhaps, calling the other person in without ever having to say a word? It's this ambiguity that makes the fan so alluring. A tool for flirtation, yes, but also a medium for distance, where all things are unsaid, hovering on the edge of meaning. You can practically feel it in the air, can't you? The hush of anticipation, the careful tilt of the fan just so, as if it is holding a delicate secret between two strangers. So, whether you were at court, in a salon, or in the streets of Seville, the fan made its statement loud and clear without saying a single word. A rustle of silk, a snap of the wrist, and you could declare your allegiance, express desire, or slip into the safe shadow of obscurity. Your message was carried not by your voice, but by the flutter of a single gesture. A small, delicate thing that spoke louder than anything else. And you wonder, as the air settles around you, whether the secrets you just discovered could ever really be fully understood, or if they were meant to remain forever in the flutter of the fan. As we continue, the fan's role expands from a courtly symbol of flirtation to a more ubiquitous fixture of everyday life. Yet, even outside the gilded palaces, its presence was no less loaded with meaning. In fact, for many who lived beyond the royal circles, the fan was far more than just a cooling device. It was a silent language of survival, an essential piece of the social puzzle. To carry a fan was to carry a message, even in the simplest of daily routines. Imagine, if you will, strolling down the cobblestone streets of Venice in the early 1800s. The sun beats down mercilessly, and a lady, dressed in a fine gown that sways with the gentle breeze, holds a fan in her hand. It's not a luxury, no, in Venice it's a tool for survival in more ways than one. Not just for cooling her skin or keeping her composed in the face of overwhelming heat, but for keeping her social standing firmly in place. As she walks, her fan flicks open and closed with the rhythm of her stride. Open, closed, closed. And you, standing across the square, are watching, trying to decipher the flicks. Is it a signal of openness or of distance? Is it a calculated gesture, carefully chosen to display grace, or perhaps something more desperate? The Venetian streets were filled with messages like these, whispered through the delicate movements of fans. Women of the time, especially those in society's upper echelons, knew that their social standing depended on how well they understood these silent gestures. One wrong flick of the wrist could cost them a relationship, or worse, their place in high society. The history books speak of the fan's many functions, but they don't often tell you about the emotional weight it carried, day in and day out. But let's take a detour and travel far beyond the canals of Venice. Picture yourself now in the heat of an Egyptian summer, where the fan has been serving people for centuries. Here, the fan was not just a fashion statement but an instrument of devotion, particularly in religious ceremonies. It was used in temples, where its flutter was said to symbolize the wings of a god, sweeping across the sky in a motion both majestic and divine. The fan, often made from feathers, was used in rituals to invoke protection and guidance, its swift movements stirring the air as though summoning the winds themselves. In these instances, the fan was far from a personal object. It became a tool of the divine, connecting earth to sky, mortal to deity. Now, let's zoom in on something a little more curious. You know how today we think of fans as all about creating a breeze or making us feel cool in summer, right? But back in the 18th century, fans were sometimes used for very different reasons. Picture a hot summer afternoon in a London parlor. A woman has her fan wide open, but she's not using it for cooling. No, this time she's using it as a shield. You see, back then, it wasn't uncommon for fans to be lined with bits of reflective material, mirror-like surfaces, designed specifically to catch the light in such a way that they could blind a would-be attacker. Imagine a woman seated on a plush settee, a man daring to approach too closely. A quick flick of her fan, and bam! She's created a shield of light, a silent but powerful defense against anyone trying to get too near. History isn't always about grand speeches. Sometimes it's about small, almost silly inventions like this that shift the balance of power. As odd as this might sound, small tweaks to the fan design didn't just make it practical for comfort. They turned it into something of an art form. Fans would often feature detailed paintings on their surfaces, scenes from mythology, intricate florals, or grand historical events, all immortalized in delicate silk or paper. Some historians claim that the ability to judge a person's social worth could even be discerned by examining the quality of their fan. But beyond the monetary value of the fan's materials, the painted scenes often told a story, offering a glimpse into the tastes, values, and political leanings of its owner. For example, if you owned a fan adorned with the face of a great military leader, or perhaps a scene of conquest, the message was clear: you were someone with influence. But if you were holding a fan decorated with a peaceful countryside scene, perhaps a pastoral painting, the message was one of calm and virtue. Fans, in their silent grace, could weave entire biographies into a single flick. In fact, the nature of the designs carried an entirely different kind of romantic language. While a simple flower might signal respect or politeness, a fan painted with the scene of a warrior on horseback could indicate a love of adventure, the desire for something more exciting, a yearning for a life that goes beyond polite salons and stately balls. It was a subtle nod, a whisper of your inner desires to the right person, at the right time. These designs weren't just decoration. They were an invitation to see past the surface, to understand the deeper longing or wish that lay beneath. Historians still argue whether the fan's popularity was more rooted in function or fashion. On one hand, it was undeniably useful in the heat, almost indispensable in tropical climates and hot summer months. But on the other hand, it also provided an opportunity to express identity. The fan was an extension of one's personality, as personal as the clothes you chose to wear, and just as telling. The fan also had an impact beyond Europe and the Middle East. In China, it was used not only in everyday life but as an important cultural symbol. You could find fans made of everything from paper to feathers, intricately painted and designed to reflect both the wearer's status and their artistic taste. Some even say the fan served as a symbol of balance, its duality reflecting both the calm and storm of the human condition. So, as you hold this object in your mind, the fan, let it take on a new life in your thoughts. It's not just a simple tool to ward off heat. It's a language, a secret code, a tool of power, and a symbol of elegance, all wrapped up in one delicate, whispering gesture. The intrigue around fans continues to deepen as we move into the 19th century. By now, the fan had taken on an even more significant role within society, becoming a symbol not just of flirtation and beauty, but of power and social standing. And now, as our story moves into the Victorian era, we encounter a fascinating twist, where the fan becomes a tool of restraint and subtlety, wrapped in a world of rigid social decorum. But here, in the haze of dimly lit drawing rooms and the soft rustling of lace curtains, the fan's language becomes more complex, and perhaps even more dangerous. Imagine yourself in a posh Victorian parlor, where the art of the fan is taken very seriously. It's a cool evening, but the room feels warm with the flickering glow of a fireplace. A woman enters the room, her gown rustling like 1,000 whispers, and in her delicate hand, she holds a fan, its intricate lace edges glimmering softly in the firelight. She raises it briefly, letting it flutter open, and the room quiets. People around her stare, captivated. The fan, as you may have guessed, is not merely there for cooling her face. It's part of a very serious game. This is where the fan's ability to speak in a secret language is at its peak. An era when subtlety was key, and a mere flick of a fan could communicate volumes. Now, in this social context, the fan became the ultimate tool for navigating the complex, sometimes suffocating rules of Victorian society. But it wasn't just about signaling love or flirtation. Oh no, it was also about sending warnings, messages of disinterest, of refusal, or even dangerous defiance. Historians often muse over the mystery of how much was truly communicated through fans in the Victorian era, with some even suggesting that the fan's quiet movements could effectively change the entire course of social interactions. At a ball, one wrong flick of the fan could doom your reputation. A sudden shift in how you handled your fan, perhaps a quick snap shut in the middle of a conversation, might signal that you had had enough of a person or a conversation. In these moments, you could make someone feel like they had just crossed a line, without uttering a single word. And in the Victorian age, where marriage was often a matter of social strategy rather than personal affection, the fan became a tool of the political game. In an era where courting was governed by strict rituals, The fan allowed women to maintain a semblance of control, to subtly guide the pace of relationships, or even to say no when it seemed impossible to do so outright. One historian once claimed that women who mastered the art of fan language could be more powerful in courtship than those who simply relied on their beauty. And perhaps, in this regard, the fan was both a shield and a weapon, a delicate, powerful instrument that allowed women to preserve autonomy even in the most complex and constrained of environments. Let's take a quick leap from the refined salons of Victorian England to Paris during the same era, where the fan began to evolve further. In this hub of creativity and revolution, the fan wasn't just a symbol of social power. It became a tool of rebellion, of defiance against societal norms. The bohemian artists of Paris, with their rebellious streaks and their daring defiance of tradition, began to use fans not just to convey grace, but as a tool of protest. It's a curious and fun twist. In a city teeming with political upheaval and artistic revolution, the fan transformed into an artistic canvas, painted with bold political statements and declarations of artistic freedom. You might imagine these fans as pieces of avant-garde art, bold and unrestrained, just as the movements of the artists who designed them. They often featured provocative images, such as abstract patterns or even portraits of political leaders who were seen as symbols of resistance. To wave such a fan at a public event, whether it was a political protest or an art gathering, was to send a message to the world that you didn't just live within the established norms. You were creating your own. And in a society like Paris, where such subtlety and defiance could change the course of art and politics, the fan became an emblem of revolution in the most fashionable way possible. Historians, however, still debate just how widespread this revolutionary use of fans was. Some argue that it was mainly an underground phenomenon, a small rebellion that never fully broke free of the confines of social propriety. Others believe it was much more common, that in the bustling streets of Paris, the fan's language was used for all sorts of personal, artistic, and political expression. What we can be sure of, though, is that fans in this period embodied the clash of old and new, tradition and revolution. And in this period of transition, fans were not just tools of personal expression, they were statements of identity. Meanwhile, over in Japan, the fan had taken on a very different role. While it was still an essential part of daily life, it was also deeply entwined with the country's cultural and spiritual practices. In Japan, the fan became a symbol of the seasons, a reminder of nature's cycles. Fans were decorated with scenes of the changing landscape, blossoming cherry trees, or the gentle waves of the ocean. The Japanese fan also became associated with the performative arts, particularly kabuki theater, where actors used fans as props to express everything from emotion to action. In this context, the fan took on a larger symbolic meaning. It was not just a tool for personal cooling or flirtation, but a means of communicating emotion and intention to an audience. This cultural significance of the fan in Japan made its way into various other aspects of life, influencing everything from poetry to fashion to religious ceremonies. It was, once again, far more than a simple accessory. It was a vessel for the soul, a means of articulating the inexpressible. And that, in many ways, is what sets the history of the fan apart from so many other objects in history. Its mysterious language continues to intrigue us today, as we wonder what it means to communicate without words, to whisper our thoughts with a flutter of the wrist. And yet, even as the fan's language spread and evolved across the globe, there were still those who doubted its true power. Was it a game of seduction or a symbol of true sentiment? Was it a tool of self-expression or a secret weapon in the hands of the skilled? Historians still debate whether fans, like any language, can truly be understood across all cultures and times. Some say they were simply clever tools of flirtation and society's expectations. Others, though, point to the fan as an intricate symbol of the deep, sometimes unspoken connections we share, whether through art, love, or rebellion. We continue on our journey through the world of fans, moving into the early 20th century, where this simple, elegant accessory would undergo a dramatic transformation. At this point, the fan was no longer simply a symbol of social rank or a means of secret flirtation. It had become a fixture of high fashion, an item that would eventually be tied to the rise of Art Deco and the opulence of the Roaring Twenties. Fans were now embellished with feathers, rhinestones, and even pearls, transforming them from practical cooling devices into luxury items that denoted wealth and style. But in this glamorous era, the fan still had something to say. Imagine walking into a lavish ballroom in the 1920s. The floor is polished to perfection, reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers overhead. The air is thick with music, laughter, and the soft rustle of lace and silk. Across the room, women in flowing dresses hold fans adorned with glittering jewels and delicate patterns. Some use their fans to cool their faces, while others twirl them artfully in the air. But amidst the beauty and extravagance, these fans still retain their quiet power. The subtle language of the fan was not lost on those who used it in this new era. While society had shifted, subtle messages were still being passed between flicks and gestures. In this glamorous time, women would use their fans in much the same way as their Victorian ancestors did. Only now, the gestures had evolved into something a little more liberated. No longer constrained by the stiff corsets of the past, women of the 1920s wielded their fans with a greater sense of freedom. But, just as before, every flick, snap, or tilt still held meaning. Whether it was a flirtatious glance or a quiet warning to an unwelcome suitor, the fan was still very much a part of the social game. And yet, there was a new sense of fun and lightness to the whole affair. Instead of being purely a tool of subtlety, the fan was now an accessory, something to be shown off and enjoyed. But the language of the fan didn't stop at flirtation or social propriety. During the early 20th century, it became a symbol of cultural shifts, one that embraced change and the new modernity of the Jazz Age. Fans were now more than just accessories for rich women at high society gatherings. They became something that people of all walks of life could use. The artistic avant-garde scene also became enamored with the fan, incorporating it into performances, art pieces, and even movies. Some fans were designed with exotic and outlandish patterns, taking inspiration from the East and blending it with Western opulence. This unique fusion became emblematic of the period's tendency to cross cultural boundaries and explore new forms of self-expression. Yet, as the 20th century pressed on, the fan's popularity began to wane. As modernity took hold, technology took over many of the functions once fulfilled by the fan. The rise of air conditioning in the 1950s made fans less of a necessity. But this didn't mean that the fan was completely gone. Instead, it evolved, taking on more niche forms. It still graced the hands of dancers, artists, and those in the world of fashion, but its place in mainstream society was less central. Still, there were moments where the fan would make a dramatic reappearance, often as a symbol of nostalgia or an embrace of past glamour. And in the years that followed, fans continued to show up in various forms of art and culture. In cinema, for example, the fan became an iconic prop. Actresses in movies from the 1930s and 1940s used their fans to convey everything from tension to flirtation to outright mystery. One iconic scene involves a famous actress using her fan to shield her face, creating an aura of suspense and intrigue. The symbolism of the fan remained strong. It was still an object with the power to create meaning, even in this new era. And yet, just as it had done throughout history, the fan's significance shifted with the times. Today, the fan may no longer carry the same weight in day-to-day life as it once did. But there's something timeless about the fan. Even though it no longer serves the practical function it once did, it remains an object of fascination and historical interest. From flirtation to defiance, from art to rebellion, the fan's language has woven its way through the tapestry of history, leaving behind whispers of the past. In the modern era, the fan still pops up in various forms of fashion, performance, and culture. It may not be a daily tool for communication, but it has evolved into a symbol of history itself, a quiet reminder of how we once spoke through the fluttering of a simple object, even when words weren't enough. As historians debate the ultimate role the fan played in changing society, one thing is clear: it was never just a simple accessory. Whether a delicate piece of silk or an elaborate work of art, the fan has always been a powerful symbol of flirtation, rebellion, grace, and freedom. And perhaps, in that quiet flutter of movement, there's a timeless connection to the past, one that continues to captivate and intrigue us, century after century. As we step into the mid-20th century, the fan's role continues to morph in unexpected ways. This time, it finds itself entangled in the cultural shifts of a post-war world. Though its heyday in high society has passed, the fan hasn't disappeared. Instead, it reinvents itself, particularly in the world of performance arts and pop culture. The fan's language, once subtle and reserved for elite circles, begins to open up and cross into new arenas. In the 1950s, film stars like Marilyn Monroe would be photographed holding fans as a way to keep cool under the hot studio lights. But these images would come to symbolize more than just a cooling tool. They became iconic symbols of beauty and allure. You've probably seen those striking black and white photographs of Monroe, her fan delicately held in her hand, her expression just as mysterious as the flutter of the fan itself. This wasn't just a gesture. It was an act of performance. In a way, the fan became a prop in an ever-evolving dance between public image and personal power. But the fan's role wasn't confined to Hollywood glamour. In the world of jazz and swing music, the fan took on a new kind of rhythm. It was no longer just a dainty symbol of elegance. It became a tool of rhythm and performance. Jazz musicians, particularly those in the vaudeville tradition, used fans as part of their acts, incorporating the sudden snap of the fan into their dance numbers. The flick of the wrist synchronized perfectly with the energetic, upbeat tempos of the music, making the fan a fixture of not only flirtation but also performance and entertainment. The smooth, rhythmic flick of the fan could be as hypnotic as the music itself. By the 1960s and 1970s, the fan had become a staple of counterculture movements. Amidst the rise of political unrest and social change, the fan re-emerged as a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and even defiance. In the world of 1960s fashion, we begin to see bohemian and hippie figures embracing the fan, using it not just as an accessory but as a statement. It became a tool of self-expression, much like the flamboyant clothes and bold hairstyles of the era. In the hands of protesters, artists, and political activists, the fan was transformed from a quiet symbol of society's upper class to a loud and proud tool of rebellion. A simple flick of the wrist could now express frustration, empowerment, or desire for change. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this transformation is how the fan crossed into subcultures. In the world of burlesque, the fan took on its most playful form. Dancers in the early 20th century had already been using fans as part of their performances. But by the mid-century, fans became synonymous with seductive art. The slow, deliberate movements of the fan, as it was unfurled and twirled around a dancer's body, became a key part of the striptease. The fan, now synonymous with sultriness, was a part of a larger dance, one that blended allure, mystery, and empowerment. The sheer drama of the fan's movements created an atmosphere that was as much about control as it was about seduction. The unveiling of the dancer's body was mirrored in the gradual unfolding of the fan, making the fan's once innocent flutter a captivating performance of its own. Even within the civil rights movement and the growing feminist movements of the 1960s and 1970s, the fan found its way into the hands of those fighting for change. It became a tool to assert power, rather than simply to entertain or attract. The act of holding a fan, whether it was used to cover one's face or to display a particular symbol, became a statement of identity, freedom, and personal autonomy. In this way, the fan continued its evolution, slowly growing more democratic, crossing the boundaries of class, gender, and race. Meanwhile, in parts of Asia, the fan maintained a more traditional role in rituals, theater, and cultural performances. In Japan, for example, the kabuki theater continued to incorporate the fan as an essential part of the costume, using it not just for flirtation but as a symbol of theatricality and emotional depth. The fans used in kabuki performances were large, colorful, and expressive, each gesture meant to convey a specific emotional state or narrative element. Whether in the form of a dramatic flick of the wrist or a slow, deliberate opening, these movements added layers of meaning to the performance. By the time the 1980s rolled around, the fan had all but faded from everyday use in the West. However, it continued to appear in fashion shows, theater productions, and art galleries, still imbued with the mystery and magic it had carried through the ages. The fan had become something of an anachronism, a link to a more graceful, elegant time. In the world of haute couture, designers would still use the fan as part of their collections, adding a touch of vintage flair to otherwise modern outfits. The fan had shifted from a practical tool of communication to a nostalgic symbol of femininity and grace. And though no longer an everyday item, it still carried with it the elegance and subtlety that made it a part of history's long conversation on flirtation, power, and performance. In many ways, the fan's journey into the 20th century mirrors the changes in society itself. It went from a tool of reserved elegance and subtle flirtation to one of self-expression, rebellion, and artistic performance. The fan's message was ever-changing, adapting to the political, social, and cultural contexts in which it found itself. And while it may no longer be a ubiquitous part of daily life, the fan continues to exist as a symbol of all that is graceful, seductive, and powerful in the quietest of gestures. As we move into the modern era, the fan continues to be a quiet, though significant cultural artifact. By the end of the 20th century, the rise of mass production and globalization saw the fan make its way into pop culture once again, but this time in a very different form. The fan may not have been an essential accessory for the average person, but it found a place in the realms of theater, performance art, and fashion once again. Its function was no longer about flirtation or decorum. It had become part of the spectacle, a symbolic tool of creative expression. Take avant-garde fashion shows, for instance, where designers would use fans to add drama and flair to their creations. These fans weren't necessarily for cooling down. Instead, they were carefully crafted to enhance the movements of the model, often in bold, exaggerated sizes and colors. Think of a fan with a huge, dramatic sweep, catching the light as the model twirled. It was as if the fan had become part of a performance piece, contributing to the larger story of the clothing. What was once a subtle communication tool had transformed into an accessory that could demand attention and evoke a sense of theater. In the 1990s and 2000s, the fan started to reappear in music videos, used by pop stars like Beyoncé and Madonna. In these performances, the fan once again took on a glamorous, almost mystical aura. Its quick, sudden movements emphasized the power of the performer, the flick of the fan almost becoming a metaphor for their dominance over the audience's attention. With Beyoncé in particular, the fan became part of her powerful stage presence, an accessory that helped magnify the sensuality and charisma that she exuded. Much like the burlesque performances of the early 20th century, the fan was used as a symbol of control and desire, a reminder that even in modern times, the simplest gestures can have the most impact. While these pop culture moments were fascinating, the fan's influence didn't just stay within the world of performance. As the 2010s arrived, the fan took on a new role in the growing world of cosplay and anime. In this subculture, fans were used not only as part of the costume but also as props to embody particular characters or personas. Cosplayers often incorporate the fan into their costumes to add an element of drama or elegance to their outfits. For some, it was more than just a prop. It was a symbol of power or mystery, much like it had been in the days of the Georgian and Victorian elite. In anime, female characters are often seen wielding fans with grace, their movements slow and deliberate, reinforcing a kind of ethereal beauty or delicate strength. Cosplayers adopt these characters, holding fans in the same way to capture their essence, creating a seamless link between the old-world elegance of fan language and the modern, vibrant expressions of pop culture. The fan also saw a resurgence in fashion among younger generations. Designers in the 2010s began to embrace the nostalgic appeal of the fan, using it in collections that were meant to evoke the glamour of bygone eras. But this time, the fan was not only about romance or elegance. It was about the reinvention of those qualities for a new generation.